organisation that's doing that and has been picking up the consequences of many of the issues we've been talking about for some time is the National Union of Journalists. We were hoping to have Michelle Sanistreet, the General Secretary. We're equally delighted to have Donnacha DeLong, the President of the NUJ. Michelle sends her apologies. Donnacha, you're very welcome. Thank you.
I regularly get to introduce myself as not being Michelle Sanistreet on the listing, but there's a lot of other things going on, and sometimes we need to share out the responsibilities. One thing I'd like to say at the very, very beginning is that press regulation, proper press regulation, is not about clamping down on freedom of the press. What is clamping down on freedom of the press are things that are going on now, but we had a huge victory today when a collection of our journalists and media bodies took on the police, who have been using production orders to try and make journalists become their information gatherers. That is unacceptable, and that's the kind of thing that needs to be cracked down. And actually improved press regulation, which details the rights and responsibilities of the press, is something that potentially we could use to defend the press from those kind of illegitimate requests from those in power. In terms of positive solutions, there are so many layers to this. I'm probably going to rattle through very quickly, and apologies if you can't keep up, but there are so many layers to this that need to be dealt with that trying to fit them all into probably around 4.5 minutes is going to be very difficult. So starting at the very bottom, I'm going to echo what Owen said earlier. Reunionising the media is absolutely essential. Not just journalists, but the entire media. Giving people back the right to have a trade union represent their views and their issues is absolutely essential. We still don't have that right in relation to News International. When Murdoch kicked the unions out over 25 years ago, the situation that keeps the unions out is still in place. There is still a gap in the law on trade union recognition that allows News International to recognise a fake union, News International Staff Association. Rupert Murdoch claims not to know about the loophole that was left in the law back at the end of the 90s, which is fairly astounding. It's very astounding if it's true, because that means that the new Labour government just gave it to him without him even asking for it. But that needs to change, and we are changing it on the ground. The first NUJ chapel has been re-established in News International, and we are going to challenge Neatly's recognition. But that's not enough, because, as Richard knows, we had a union in the Express, but there was very little we could actually do. The union reported the newspaper to the Press Complaints Commission twice. At one point, rose up and stopped the Daily Star being published because of the content it was trying to put in place. But without any kind of individual support for individual journalists so they can stand up to unethical requests from their bosses, even the strongest union is going to have problems when they're facing a boss like Richard Desmond, who's perfectly happy to push people out of the organisation or leave people in the situation that Richard was in. They have to resign to be able to do it. And actually this is something Rupert Murdoch said he supports, which is a conscience clause in the contract of every journalist, which gives them the right to say no when they're being asked to do something unethical or illegal. And this is a big part of our campaign. To back that up, we need a proper regulatory system. We need a regulatory system that is not the bosses regulating the bosses for their own means and their own ends. That's what the PCC was. It was nothing more than a group of the bosses sitting together and deciding amongst themselves whether things were acceptable. And when we talk about ethics, ethics are far beyond issues like phone hacking. An issue like phone hacking is not an ethical issue. It's a legal issue. It's against the law. That's not an ethical choice. Ethics are about trying to build a media that is based on accuracy, balance and fairness. And I think we can see across the piece. And seeing people representing the Mail at the Leveson inquiry claiming their newspapers are ethical, I am sure there are not just Muslims, but there are travellers, there are asylum seekers, there are disabled people. I'm more than sure, I know there are many people in these groups who would absolutely disagree that the Mail and other newspapers are ethical. Ethics is about being fair, representing all sides of the media. We need a process and a system in place that actually gives everybody the right to complain about unethical media. The PCC restricted the right to complain to those affected. So this is what happened in the Express. The journalists were told they weren't the people they were writing about, so they had no right to complain about the lack of ethics in the stuff they were being forced to write. We need a new version of the PCC. We need a replacement for the PCC that is not dominated by the bosses, that has the voice of working journalists, but also the voice of civil society on that group. And we're arguing that actually civil society should hold the majority on any new form of press regulation. This is the system that's in place now in Ireland, and it's something the NUJ was very involved in getting built. And what happens there is actually, it's very interesting, because there is no point in a majority sticking together against everybody else. It means that the different editors and the different newspaper groups tend to split up. They tend to argue against each other because the majority is those who are not them. The bigger issue, and the really substantial issue that really needs to be looked at, and it's been mentioned before, it's been mentioned in terms of the News International and their domination of the national press. But actually we've got an issue across the board. The domination of regional press by newspaper groups who have no interest in journalism and only an interest in profit. NewsQuest, Trinity Mirror, Johnson Press, who are closing newspapers, sacking journalists and turning what were once proud regional and local newspapers into unreadable rags because there's nobody left to write for them. Or, if the people are really unlucky, nothing at all. And so many local newspapers have been closed down that there are increasing numbers of people who have no local newspapers at all. We need to look at ownership of the media, we need to look at the domination of all of the different groups. Whether it's Northcliffe, or News International, or Trinity Mirror, or Johnson Press. We need to break this up. We need to fight for support for new and alternative ways of producing media, of communities getting involved, in unions getting involved, and build new media from the ground up. Well, we need support from the top that actually says that these groups are not allowed to dominate and control the media. And the final point, and something that hasn't really been mentioned at all in Leveson, is how issues like distribution and display in news agents affect the ability to create new newspapers and to create new titles. I'm sure a lot of people in this room have seen more copies of Red Pepper today in the lobby than they've ever done in a newspaper. That is the case with so many other titles, because there is no right to display in a newsagent here in the UK, which actually in other countries in Northern Europe you do have that right. And these are all the issues that need to be looked at. Ownership and control of the media, but also distribution, also what titles are displayed, so actually people have the right and the ability to choose and to read and to access proper media. And these are a short snapshot of some of the things that the NUJ is trying to work on now, and I hope you can all support them.
Thank you, Donnacha. I recommend, if you get the chance, that you read the NUJ's statement and submission to the Leveson inquiry. It's extremely powerful reading. I have a small